Code That Fits in Your Head with Mark Seemann.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results. They are hiring both architects and .NET engineers who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers for that. I'm really excited about our guest today on the show. His name is Mark Seemann, and he's a Danish software developer based in Copenhagen, Denmark. His professional interests include functional programming, object-oriented development, as well as software development in general. And apart from writing 2 books, he's also written numerous articles and blog posts about related topics. And despite being mostly a .NET developer, he takes most of his inspiration from sources across a wide range of technologies, including Haskell and lots of pattern books. When he was originally poised to become a rock star, or, if we failed that, a graphic novelist, and he one day found himself with insufficient talent for either one of those, a master's degree in economics, and a desire for working with computers, and he's been doing the latter intermittently since 1995. But when not working with software or spending time with his family, he enjoys reading and listening to and playing music, as well as preparing and consuming gourmet food and wine. And he's the author of his book so far, author of Dependency Injection in .NET, as well as his recent book, Code That Fits in Your Head. And you can also find him on Pluralsight with, I think, up to 8 courses, and his blog at blog.ploeh.dk. Mark, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And you'll have to pronounce for us how you say your blog URL.
It's blog.ploeh.dk.
Awesome. Now,
yep.
With your recent books and Pluralsight and speaking and all that, there's plenty of people who are familiar with you. But for those who aren't and they're just kind of getting to know you for the first time, what are the high points of your background that kind of led you up to what you're working on today professionally?
Right. So you already introduced me. So yeah, I'm based in Denmark. I'm in Copenhagen. I've been there all my life. And I would say the thing that I've been doing, that I've been focusing on for the last, couple of decades now is how to write software in a way that that is sustainable for a team in the sense that, you need to write software that works and is correct today, but you probably also want to be able to make changes to it, next year and next year again. So that's sort of like that took my fancy many years ago. Can you say that in English?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, yeah. But yeah. So I just thought that was interesting, or maybe it's just an excuse for obsessing with the details of code that no one else cares about. That might be the case also. But I really like just working with code.
Yeah. Well, every listener agrees with you. It's fun to work with code.
I should hope so. Yes.
It's we're the odd types that find it fun to type characters that sometimes test the reaches of the keyboard and just tell the computer what to do. But
oh yes,
I want to dive into a lot of the things that you've kind of put into your latest book, Code That Fits in Your Head, because I was and I'm only a third of the way through, but it's fascinating. It's a book that we need, and of course, with any listeners, yes, I recommend the book. It's not just, hey, do you have a book that you're pitching? No, it's a really good book already, and I've only read a third of it. But what was your thought process? When did you first think, man, somebody needs to write a book? It's missing. There's other stuff, but there's just what was your thought process, and when did that start?
Yeah, so it basically just grew out of work that I did with my clients. So I work as an independent software consultant when I'm not speaking at conferences and things like that. So I've been coaching various different teams, and at one time I started to realize that when they would ask me, often they would ask me sort of like the same types of questions, and I also discovered that there were certain answers that sort of resonated better with people than other answers. So naturally I would sort of, when I was trying to explain what's a good direction of going, or why are you writing the code like this and not like this, and so on, and I could just tell that there's certain types of, or there were certain explanations that I would give people that just seemed to resonate. So obviously I would reuse those again and again. So like that, when you've done this 10 times or maybe more, you start to think, I've now given the same answer 10 times. And it seems like every time I give this answer, people are actually nodding their heads and thinking, oh, this is a good idea. I haven't heard this before. So I thought, maybe instead of just, going and doing this, the 11th and the 12th time, I should scale myself out and just write them down instead, so that more people could benefit from that. So that was sort of like the spark for the original idea. And then I'm just a writer. Naturally, I really love writing, so it was quite natural for me to just sit down and actually start writing a book. So I actually did that in January. I started writing the book in January 2020. So that was actually, before the pandemic lockdown. But then when everything locked down, I just had, plenty of time for actually writing the book. So I managed to write the entire book in a year, because I didn't have much else to do.
Right. Awesome.
So basically it's sort of like a collection of various different ideas that I've found those ideas are useful for people across various different types of organizations. So it's sort of like a catalog where you can pick the things that you like, but then there's this theme that runs through the entire book of code that fits in your head.
There's plenty of other books that have code samples, but you chose to attempt to use the same sample throughout. Was that pretty challenging, or did that fall in place nicely?
That actually fell in place pretty well. So a lot of the, particularly the second half of the book, is more or less written around. The second half of the book it contains a lot of things that are inspired about my work with that code base. But one of the reasons why I wanted to use one fairly big and realistic code base all the way through that's because I've been talking about lots of things that have to do with how you organize code and how various different parts of the code base play together. Many years ago I did dependency injection, and that was always a thing that came up. How does dependency injection work across a large-ish code base? So I thought, and then a complaint that I always heard was that there are no realistic code bases, example code bases out there, because all the really big code bases are proprietary. And I thought, I'm not going to sit down and write a code base that represents months of work and just for a blog post. But then I thought, for a book, to support a book, that actually makes more sense to me. So I was hoping to fill a gap in the market there where people were sort of, asking for a realistic code base of a realistic size. So it's not a huge code base, but it's not trivial either. So you should sort of be able to get some ideas about, how to organize code and how things, work together from looking at that code base as well. So that was one of the major things that I actually wanted to do with the book. So I'd probably say about, of that year that I spent writing the book, it's probably a couple of months that went into just writing that code base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so many interesting topics in the book and things that make you will surely make the reader scratch their head. But talk about your thought process around projects, why you don't like software projects.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, for the people who are in a Microsoft mindset, we should probably say when we talk about projects here, we are not talking about Visual Studio projects. We are talking about the notion of running software development work as a project. So that's what I have a little bit of a problem with. So the thing is, a project is something that has a start date and an end date, and it's not so much the start date that's a problem. It's more like the end date that's a problem, because what often happens when you have software development that runs until a certain end date is that you first of all you often end up having to do a lot of you have to make a lot of compromises when you reach the deadline, because you probably, for everyone who's done this, you that you invariably run late, and then you need to do to make compromises or take on technical debt, and all sorts of other things that happen in order to that you have to do in order to reach the deadline. And then what then sometimes happens is that if you then deliver that software as a finished product, or whatever you want to call it, there's a few options that might happen, and if the software ends up being unsuccessful, then you then you sort of have this thing lying around that's not really being much maintained, and then you probably have some maintenance developers working on that, but they're not the same people who actually work with the original code base, so they don't understand all the decisions that were made in the code base and so on. So that causes the code base to deteriorate quite rapidly. But the problem is also that even if the software becomes a success, then you need to do a new project. So there's one thing about that where you sort of end up going in these spurts where you sort of often end up having to do a lot of compromises towards the end, and often you also see a change in personnel, so that the people who then start on the version 2 or the version 3 projects are not necessarily the same as the previous people who worked on the first project. So again, that creates a lot of missed opportunities to fix the code base, and that you again have technical debt building up. So in general, I'm quite concerned about this thing about technical debt or code rot, or whatever you want to call it, because there's this notion going around that's been going around for quite a few years after sorry, my brain just went into Danish mode there.
Well, technical debt's been around for a long time, or at least the discussion about it.
But it's not so much that, but there's this notion that's been going around for maybe the last 10, 15 years in conferences and so on, that says we should only write code that matters, that produces value to the business. And I'm actually all for that notion, because yes, you are writing software in order to solve some sort of business problem. But I also think at the same time, we also have to have a little bit of a longer term view on things, because what happens if you very myopically focus on just the here and now business value, what tends to happen is that you don't think about the long-term impact of the way you structure your code, and then it just becomes worse and worse. And you often have business people eventually coming, they'll come by and say, we need to do something about the way you write code, because things have just slowed down to a pace where we ask for new features and nothing happens anymore. Mm-hmm. So this is actually something that happens with quite a few of the clients that I've had the last couple of years. When I'm asking them, why do you even want to engage me? Why do you want to all of a sudden do test-driven development or continuous delivery or things like that? And they're basically saying, well, the business people asked us to do this because they feel that they're stuck basically, and it turns out that it's a little bit when the business people discover that they are having that problem, it is really really late. It might actually often be too late, but maybe you can turn things around, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I remember a survey, a DevOps survey result. I can't remember, maybe it was probably 7 years ago now, about the success rate of the Scrum project owner role, about predicting what actually will be valuable to the business, and then alternatively prioritizing items that end up not working out like they thought it would. So yeah, there's not a good batting average, even for the people that are supposed to know what would be valuable for the business.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems that I'm having with this project mindset, is that it often gives people an idea where when things start to become not so pleasant anymore, they basically just fix their eyes on the deadline and say, well, I just have to suffer through this a few more months, and then I can go and do something else. And that just makes everyone care less about the quality of the code, and that just creates further grief down the line.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I have this problem with the project model of thought, if you will, because successful software stays around, and if the software is successful, it's always going to be there's always going to be requests for more features and bug fixing and things like that. And I think it's just destructive to think about developing that software as a series of projects. It's probably more constructive to think about that software development process as an ongoing. You're basically nurturing and caring for this piece of software and helping it grow into an indeterminate future. So I think that's probably going to give you hopefully it will give you a better mindset on that you actually care about the stuff that you're working with.
Sure.
I could be wrong though.
well, your book is full of so many very specific patterns, but you start out, and I'm actually looking at it right now, but with advice for people creating a new code base, the checklist for creating a new code base. Now you give a very basic checklist, but for those creating a new application, whether they're younger programmers or more experienced, it just so happens to be we're starting a new application. Okay, brand new Git repository. In your view, what are the must-haves for getting started with a new application?
Right. Okay. So first of all, the one that I'm giving in the book it's both. I'm using that myself, but it's also meant as an inspiration. So you don't have to follow this slavishly. There's basically three things. Let's see if I can remember it even now. Otherwise, checklists are to help your brain, so you don't have to keep them in your head. But it's something like use Git. Have a build script, and treat all warnings as errors, and basically during under the heading of treating all warnings as errors is basically also just turn on any sort of static analysis you can get your hands on, because the more the merrier, basically. Let's see. Did I remember it right?
Well, those are the three in there. But there's
okay, good.
I mean, an objection that a lot of people might have would be, use Git. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But then automate the build. Well, there's nothing to automate yet. There's
true.
Later we need to at least get the basic application in place. And a lot of times some teams will have one person of decent experience tasked with putting the basic structure in place before we get more developers involved with the new code base. And so, what's your thought process around no, automate the build now. Don't wait until a little bit later.
But the reason why I say that you should do that now is because it's super easy to do it if you do it right away. It's not a work item. It's just something that you do. So when I do that with a new code base, the first thing that I do when I automate the build, okay, so first of all, I initialize the Git repository because that's the first thing you have to do. And then the next thing I do, the first commit that I do in Git is I add a git ignore and I add a build script file. It's just a batch file. And it literally does nothing at that point. It's just a batch file that immediately exits. There's nothing in, maybe a comment, but that's it. Because there's no code. So it can't really do anything. But it just means that, I know that if I have to go back in time and do something, and try to work with the code base as it looked in the past, there's always going to be a build script that is working, and I should be able to run that build script in order to see, if the application is actually working and so on. So I know it's just always going to be there. And the reason why I think it's important to get it in very early on, so maybe you don't have to do it in the first commit, but very early on, is that it's just much easier to add it when there's nothing to it. And then once you sort of start adding more meat to the bones of the application itself, you also realize that you have to add more steps to the build script. So the first thing is, as soon as you have your code, you now go and change the build script so that it actually compiles the code. And then later on, maybe still early on, but a little bit later on, you decide you add some unit tests or some automated tests, and then you go and change the build script again to say, okay, we need to run those tests. And then, again, that might, depending on what sort of application it is, that, more things might, build up that the build script has to do. Maybe the build script has to set up a database or, some other resources and so on. And if you are just, if updating the build script is just part of the way you work, it's something that you don't really have to plan for it. You just in air quotes, but you have to do that as part of the way you're working. And I think you have a better chance of having a build script that's actually useful for everyone by doing this right away. And the same thing goes for turning compiler warnings into errors. This is something that is really difficult to do if you already have a big code base with lots of compiler warnings. I've seen those, and where people have thousands of warnings, and I say, well, you really should think about turning those warnings into errors, because there are actually problems in your most compiler warnings indicate that you have problems in your code. You really should fix them. And then they say, well, but there's too many now, and it just starts to become this almost insurmountable thing that people can't really get started with because it's grown too big. And then you prevent that from the outset. You just say, well, there's no code, but apart from hello world, static void main, and then you just say, well, at that point, it is free. It costs you nothing to turn all warnings into errors, and that means once the first programmer writes the first thing that triggers a compiler warning, the code no longer compiles, and that means you have to fix that. And it's probably a mistake anyway, so you have to fix that mistake up front, and that just keeps the code base much cleaner.
Yeah.
I've had fairly good, track record with doing things like that. And sometimes it annoys people from the beginning of, particularly then when you turn on static code analysis as well. That starts to get to annoy people. But again, if you do it from the beginning, it becomes a learning opportunity more than it becomes, an annoyance.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
Coming from someone who's topped over 25 years getting paid to write code now, so and others in that same age and experience bracket, what I found, and it looks like you've kind of come to some of those conclusions, is that you say, oh, just do it, just automate the build, just turn compiler error, warnings to errors, and then other things where I remember as a young programmer even scoffing at that and I remember when it became a thing about, oh yeah, there's a setting from very early in .NET in 2002. So way back in .NET 1.0, I remember that Visual Studio setting, and I remember personally scoffing at it and seeing some of the things where, oh, they're warning me of that. I don't care about that one. So obviously I don't need this setting because it would be unreasonable to treat all those as warning. And then later on I realized, wait a minute, no. This is a good constraint. Constraints are actually liberating, and yes. I can configure, I can tell it, okay, I don't care about that one warning. Okay, let me configure it to not care about that one. But that doesn't mean that the whole capability is not useful. It's actually very useful. And so I think that falls into the classification. And there's plenty of other things where when I'm in the mindset of, I need to get this program working, what line of code do I call? What library can I use? How do I just get it working? I don't understand this. I'm not thinking about practices that overall make the environment more productive. But then as we get older, we kind of see more of the forest instead of just the trees. Is your experience similar?
Yeah, that sounds right. Because what you said, if I have to paraphrase, you're basically saying, well, if you're a young programmer, you may see a lot of those things as being obstacles, but actually, it's well, they may be small obstacles, or you can say constraints, but you could also say guardrails. It's sort of like they're supposed to keep you with in a safe area so that you don't go off and shoot yourself in the foot. And if you haven't tried to shoot yourself in the foot enough times, you may not realize how much it hurts. But then as you grow older, you sort of have had that experience, a couple of times, and then you start to realize that, oh, I actually want to be, reminded that, what I'm about to do now is not a good idea. So that's basically what you said, but just with some other words. But that mirrors my experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, your thought process in your introduction in the book talks about so many things already being published and already being out there, but you kind of pull them together. For the younger programmers also, what are some of the high points of practices? Yeah, they might have been published a decade ago or even more, but you just consider them essential to have in the tool belt.
So I would probably say if you can get to continuous delivery, there's so many other things will fall, out of, as side effects of doing that. Many other beneficial things will sort of come out of that. And so if you can get there, that is tremendously, effective. And it's not only my experience. There's this book called Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren and
Gene Kim and
Gene Kim and
Jez Humble, right?
You did Jez Humble, thank you. Yeah, I was just looking over at my bookshelf there. I keep moving the books around, so I couldn't find it. Yeah, but that book basically comes to the same conclusion, and that again that sort of also is my own experience, that being able to deploy multiple times a day, it just takes a lot of stress away. I remember, basically in one place where we did continuous delivery, I would end up asking the people who have originally asked for a feature to say, well, oh, by the way, have you had a chance to look at the feature that went live a week ago, that you originally asked for? And and the business people come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I've been so busy, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. Right. But it's just like that normal thing that most software developers are often used to, where people always come by all the time and say, how far are you? What's the status? Are you done yet? That completely goes away, and it starts to become the other way. And it's so satisfying that you can go to the business people and say, have you looked at the stuff yet? And there's no, I'm sorry, we haven't. Right. So that's fantastic, and it pulls along a lot of other good practices, because you probably don't want to do continuous delivery unless you have some sort of first of all a continuous integration pipeline. So you need to set that up. And in that continuous integration pipeline, you probably want to run some automated tests. So that, gives you a good incentive to have a good, testing strategy and good discipline around writing automated tests. And things like that. So it's not that it's not going to solve all problems, but that's probably, if you ask me about one thing, I would say that's the goal. That's something you want to aim for. And again, it's one of those things where if you're starting with a greenfield code base, that's also one of the things where that's something you should do right away. Because it is almost trivial if you have a code base and the only thing it does is it writes hello world to the console, or the equivalent for a web application is something that would just prints hello world in a text file somewhere. Automating that deployment should not be difficult,
right?
Because it is as simple as it gets. But now you have this. So now you have this, continuous integration pipeline in place where you can start doing that, and it doesn't do anything; it just says "Hello World." But now you have the build script, and you have all the automation, and that means again that when things start to become more complicated, then you have to involve databases and so on. You solve those problems, about how do we automate that part of the deployment? How do we automate updates, schema updates to relational databases? You solve them just in time, but it's not, it doesn't become a work item that you have to fight for in order to have enough hours for. And people will ask you, how many hours do you estimate that this is going to take you, or couldn't you just do it with by hand instead? Because it's just already there. It's already the way you work. So obviously, it's not that you have to do the work, but it's just much easier to do when you do it incrementally. And it's also sometimes the work becomes basically invisible in the sense that it's not something you actually have to budget for if you're budgeting hours. That's probably my one good go-to thing. Get to continuous delivery.
It's just the way you work comment. I think that's one of those big ideas. I hear so many developers who work in an environment where management or those senior to them don't value these practices, but they want to adopt it and they want to do something, and so it is treated as a work item. And you want to work for how many days on what? Whereas when there's an opportunity to redefine coding standards or team standards, and you can slip it in that. Where you say, okay, this is the way we work. Here's our team standards. We're always going to have, and then you have the checklist, and whether throw in test-driven development, so that test is just the way we work, and refactoring and the build and deployment, and then when we estimate, it's inclusive of just the way we implement things, as opposed to being a separate line item where somebody outside the development team looks at that and says, "Oh, wait a minute! If we cut that off, we cut off half of the cost of the feature. Let's cut that off."
Yeah. So and the same thing goes with refactoring, for example. People often come and talk to me after conferences and so on, and they say, well, we can't get time for refactoring because our managers will not let us do that. And I'm always like, why are you even asking them to do refactoring? I think refactoring is like it's a surgeon that before he goes into an operation, he washes his hands, or she washes her hands. It's hygiene, and you shouldn't ask permission to perform hygiene. And Ken Beck has this thing, and I can't remember the exact quote, but it goes something like that. In order to make a change, first you make the change easy, and then you make the easy change. But warning, making the change easy might be hard. It's something like that. But the thing is, and that's refactoring. So the thing is, sometimes if you get a task, a work item to say, well, you should now go and implement a new feature, and then you look at the code as it is at the moment, you say, okay, so in order to implement that feature, I would really like to change how the code is structured internally. Because that would make it easier for me to implement the new feature. Changing how the code is structured internally, we have a word for that. That's refactoring. But it shouldn't be something that ask your non-technical manager permission to do. I think it's like washing your hands. It's just you do that because overall that actually leads to better productivity. Yeah. You're not cheating your employer by doing that. It's actually the appropriate thing to do. As you can tell, now you really got me fired up here. But this is right. I am really wondering why people are feel the need to ask for that. But it could be a cultural thing because I'm here in Denmark, and Scandinavia generally has a very short power distance, so that's sort of like a sociological thing. But you don't feel that the CEO is far away from you. You feel like the CEO is, in most companies anyway, you feel like the CEO is someone you might actually sit down and have lunch with. So you, at least the places that I've worked, I've never been afraid of my managers. Yeah, if you will, and I understand that there are cultures where that's the case, and that obviously creates a different dynamic internally. So I also do understand that the stuff that I'm talking about here may not be universal, because if you're actually doing something that if you're working in a culture where if you do something that was not on spec, and then someone finds out that you did something that was out of spec, if that can get you fired, I can definitely understand why you would be defensive about it. But yeah, that's a different story, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the old resistance is very much a minority now. The industry has grown so much, and there's been so much time that the ideas, I think my experience, and of course it's limited to the United States, is the ideas are accepted. But now the question is, okay, how do I execute on it? Yeah. And if I have an existing code base, how do I get started? Because now I have to get over this mountain. But there's just so much value in just starting on it in the small and just get going in the new way.
Yeah. So that I think one of the things that I also see is that the resistance to doing test-driven development and just automated testing in general is often also comes from part of the developer base, if you will. So there are programmers who want to do test-driven development, and then there are some other clique of developers who actually don't want to do that. So nowadays it's not so much from the management that the resistance exists, but actually from other people. And I think I don't think it's something that people do on purpose, but I think it's just doing test-driven development or just writing good automated tests in general. That is really, really difficult. Yeah. So I can understand if people, particularly people who are senior, who've been in a position for a long time, and they feel very confident in what they've been doing, so far, and then all of a sudden you throw them into a situation where they feel that they don't have control, where they feel that they don't know what they're doing. I can understand that if you're not being very if you're not applying some metacognition there, then you would have some resistance to that, because it's basically just kind of like, oh, I feel insecure now, I don't like it, let's not do that. I mean, I get that, and I think that's a natural reaction that most people, myself included, would have. So that requires that you can sort of have this self-reflection where you can tell yourself, oh, I reacted in this way. It might actually not, it might be that the reason why I don't like to do this new thing is because it makes me feel insecure, rather than, that this is a bad idea. But then people will, come, what is the term, motivated reasoning. Then they will come up with all sorts of reasons why, TDD is a bad idea, whatever it is that they don't like. Yeah.
Sure. And anybody can do the mechanics of TDD, but really making sure that you do cover what's necessary. I had a young colleague of mine. I celebrated him, like, wow, that's all. He noticed that there were these data transfer objects, commands being sent over a queue to be processed by another process, and there were integration tests for that. But he said, I can't guarantee that every single one of these DTOs is always going to serialize properly to JSON or binary and then come out the other side at the end of the queue. And so he devised a method to sniff the entire assembly to see if there were any DTOs that didn't have a test of that type. And that's something that no code coverage tool is going to give you. It's just looking at,
right.
Was this line of code executed?
Yeah.
And I looked at that, I'm thinking, wow, that mindset, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I like when people think like that. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I know we've kind of gone long on this episode, but as we close up, besides just getting your book, Code That Fits in Your Head, for people who are kind of intrigued by this conversation and want to kind of dig in more, what would you suggest that they do after finishing this podcast?
Well, it depends on what you're intrigued about. But if you're if for listeners who are intrigued about the things that we have talked about now and want to know more about, these things that are in the book, there's quite a bit of a bibliography in the book themselves. In the book. So you can always go and look and say to see where did I actually find my sources for all the things, because I made quite a bit of an effort to try to not take. I don't want to say that I invented an idea if someone else came up with it. So I try to cite my sources, and I've done that quite extensively in the book. So that's one thing you can do, which makes me think maybe I should talk to the publisher about maybe making the bibliography public, if it's not already. There are a few excerpts from the book that are public already. I'm not sure the bibliography is. Maybe we should do that. That's a good note.
That'd be a great blog post.
Yeah.
Here's all the books that I read.
Yeah. We could do it as a blog post also. There's a couple of ideas there. That's good. But the other thing is that in general, if you think that I say things that are interesting, you can probably find some more interesting stuff on my blog. So I'm actually one of the people who still blog. I've been blogging since 2006, 7, something like that. So blog.plur.dk that we talked about at the beginning, and since 2017, I've been running a cadence where I basically publish every week. So every Monday usually, but sometimes it's going to be a Tuesday or Wednesday, but something like that. So there's plenty of stuff to keep up with there. I have more than 600 articles on the current blog at the moment. So, and it's all free. It's all free and no ads.
Oh, wow. That's nice. It keeps it uncluttered. Awesome. Well, hey, Mark, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It was a fascinating discussion for me. So thank you very much.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.